I think if we look at your life, it's very much the life that you have dreamed of, even if you didn't always necessarily know you were dreaming of it.
And just being much more authentic. And I think being people pleasers are not necessarily the most authentic people.
What flow is to you?
I'd say flow to me is all about just finding a way to be.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 28 of Flow, the podcast. I am coming to you from Bali again in my gorgeous studio. And today I'm joined by one of my favorite people in the whole world, my amazing brother, Ross.
Hello.
Hello, Rossi. So Ross is here not so much for his expertise, although he is an expert in what he does, but because Ross's journey over the last, his whole life really, but particularly over the last 5 years has been an absolute masterclass in finding your flow. And I really feel that Ross is an amazing example of somebody who is focused on being their best selves, trusting their instincts, and by doing that, creating the life of his dreams. And this episode really is about discovering from Ross how he found his flow, lessons that he's learned, challenges that he's overcome, what he does to maintain being the best version of himself. And I just think there's a lot that we can all learn from Ross's journey and from Ross. So that's my little intro to you, Rossi.
Great,
we'll kind of go
you.
into
that's very generous.
More. Ross also just turned 30, and I think that's quite a pivotal time in everyone's lives.
Definitely.
And I think that if we could all be where you are when we turn 30, life would be good. So Ross also has you obviously have a really good understanding of flow, because you've listened to me for the last however long talk about flow, dreamer, achiever, performer. And I'm really curious, just to kind of kick off the conversation, of what flow is to you. What does it mean to live in flow, to live in that performer mode? What does that mean to you?
I'd say flow to me is all about just finding a way to be truly authentic, truly engaged, truly enjoying what it is you do. A balance, as you kind of talk about, between something that stretches your mind and something that you have the capabilities and the ability to do it. I think sometimes we can get stuck between either trying to do something that's not right for us, trying to do something that's too hard for us, or we do things that are not right for us and we're not ready to do that yet. So I think it's that kind of like constant balancing act between what you're good at, what you enjoy, what you love, a little bit of what we kind of see in that ikigai type model.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's don't always want to talk about ourselves. It's like, oh, I'm so amazing, I've achieved this. But I think if we look at your life at the moment, it's very much the life that you have dreamed of, even if you didn't always necessarily know you were dreaming of it. But from a young age, you wanted to work in like a company that worked in blockchain, also having a positive impact on the world, wanting to live a life where you could surf, where you could have that freedom. What does it feel like now? Do you feel like to be living your dream life? Do you feel that you're there? Do you feel you're still reaching? Do you feel like, what does it feel like for you?
Yeah, I think trying to bring awareness to the fact that I am living what I had wanted to live and searched to live and strive to live has been something I've been quite conscious of the last 2 months to do. I think I started journaling again recently because I was kind of aware of the fact that it might pass me by and I might not kind of bring enough attention to it if I don't. So yeah, it obviously feels good and it feels right. And I think I wake up, I'm kind of going to bed and I'm waking up excited for the day that I'm going to have and the choices that I'm making. And I think the realization that I had recently, and I think I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago about this, was I was sort of like living the life out here, hopping on my scooter, going for a surf, doing some CrossFit, creating some content on X, and then starting my job, which I enjoy. And I was thinking, this is like paradise. If I'm winning this well, someone else must be getting screwed, or something else must be getting screwed. And I think for me, the realization is that there can be a win-win. And like Stephen Covey talks about this in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, like to get to a point of interdependence with people and with society and stuff is to find a way where you're just both winning. And I think in being a flow is that as well. Like you find ways that you're both winning and you find things that are right for you. So this life that I feel like I've created might be paradise and might be the right thing for me. And at times I've thought, well, maybe this is too good to be true. The reality is it feels too good to be true just because it's right for me. Yeah. But for someone else, this might not be too good to be true at all. This might be a total fucking nightmare. And they think, why am I driving around on a scooter and getting in the sea and surfing and doing CrossFit? This
I
sounds
feel
like
like
hell.
that. I feel like that about the surfing thing. Surfing's definitely not my vibe.
Yeah.
My sport out here, I was saying to Mum the other day, I was like, people are out here, everyone's got their sport. With my sport is massages.
Yeah. And it's
But
a good
my sport is
It
massage.
should be in the Olympics.
I would be gold. I would be an absolute gold professional. I really like it when we talk about, because I'm always so interested, like obviously this concept of flow, like I'm always evolving what it means to me. And when I launched this podcast, it wasn't because I necessarily felt like I had fully found my flow or I really understood necessarily what it meant to live in flow, because I think it means different things for different people. And I think that we, in our society, we have these like blanket rules. I think maybe more for women than for men, but about what success is. And I think my journey of this flow thing was very much about me trying to define what success was. I think we had such an interesting upbringing, didn't we? Being exposed to super successful people that weren't successful, people that were happy, like it was such a range, wasn't it, that we grew up in.
Yeah.
And I think when we were talking before this episode and we were talking about what flow means and how to live in flow, you said this concept of, living a life that was completely honest and completely authentic to yourself. And I think that takes a huge amount of courage to do that. And I'd love, because obviously the listeners don't necessarily know your journey, I'd love to like go through a little bit about your story, wherever you feel is like relevant to start, about how you've got to that point of living that life authentic to yourself. It's not like you just woke up one day and you're like, now it's easy for me to do that, because it's not easy for us to do that. And yeah, I'd love to just like where you feel that your journey would best start on that journey to living that authentic best life.
Yeah, I think one of the things about me, which was a big part of me growing up, was, and a big part of my personality, and a big part of a lot of guys who are kind of quite nice, but can get confused between being nice and being masculine and all these different things. I think I kind of learned that I was like very much a people pleaser, and people pleasing was part of like my identity as a young guy, like growing up through school and going into university and stuff, and wanting to get like, I got my most validation when I felt people liked me, and when I felt people were people pleased, right, by whatever. And that obviously comes down from parenting, but also from what I got like told when I was a child, like, you're a nice guy, you're really nice, all these different things. I think as I've kind of developed a little bit more clarity on who I am and become less indecisive by knowing who I am, having more clarity, it's made me able to be, well, less of a people pleaser in terms of less people pleasing people for just the very act of making that person feel that way, and just being much more authentic. And I think being people pleasers are not necessarily the most authentic people. They might be the most, like, they might be really likable and people might get on with them and they might feel like people are really gelling with them. But actually that doesn't necessarily mean you're being truthful and authentic. And I think like this switch between realizing in the last couple of years, actually being authentic and being real is just as enjoyable to be around, if not more enjoyable, than being a people pleaser. And so choosing with friends or in relationships or in work or in different situations to be truthful, and it's just the biggest unlock. And I've done that much more the last couple of months, just realizing I still have this part of me which wants to be liked, and that's like an inevitable part of me, but I'm more okay with being truthful and realizing you're actually going to be more liked if you are just honest with people and give them the information that's useful to them.
What do you think are like the main, obviously I know your life and we've obviously been close our whole lives. What do you think are like the main events that have happened in your life that have so significantly shaped your journey to getting to here? I know that's quite a big question, like quite a broad question.
So getting to this point of flow and authenticity and things.
Yeah, like the good and the bad, because I think it's a balance, isn't it? Like I think, we have highs and we have lows in our lives, and sometimes it's very easy, I think, in society to focus on the lows and the bad things that have happened because they're so significant. And our brains are also really trained, aren't they, to think about that, because that's what keeps us safe. But the highs and the lows, the key moments in your life, and they might not be the massive moments, but the ones that have brought you to this place where you're at now.
Yeah, I think starting from sort of friendships and stuff, like when you're at school, when you're a young guy, like men at school, whatever it is, I think those experiences shape you a lot. And I think trying to find your feet and find your friendship group and as you're kind of going through the kind of the journey of becoming an adult. We do please, and I think it's very common for men, particularly like young guys, to do anything they can to please those around them and to impress those and to try and like be the class clown or be the guy that gets everyone laughing or gets everyone excited and stuff. And I think I definitely learned that like I could get on with people by either being funny or by being stupid or by doing something like naughty or reckless or something like that. And then when I was in a group of friends at school, about 14, 15, and I realized like maybe I wasn't as like them at that time where they are in their lives at that point. And I wasn't able to kind of find my feet in that group like I once had. I think that was a very pivotal point for me where I realized like I'm going to have to try and figure out a way of find out who I am and find people that are better for that person at that stage in their life. Like maybe those people would be the right people for me now and maybe I'd be the right people for them. But that was definitely a pivotal point for me, definitely.
And what about, if that was at school, what about in your later life?
Yeah, I think again, like trying to figure out who you are is obviously you are the product of the people that you're around and the people that you associate yourself with. And so you kind of become those people. And some people are very good at being independent thinkers and independent people constantly throughout their life. Some people are much more like susceptible to like flowing with the people that are around and going into that space and stuff. And I think the first point I really realized I wanted to do something slightly different was around like 25. And that's where I think up until 25, and a lot of society, not everyone, but a lot of like the culture that I was around and the kind of environment that I was in, up to 25, you're on a pretty similar trajectory to those around you. You kind of tend to go to school, to college or whatever. A lot of people go to university, not all. And I think that's where like the first big change happens. The people that choose not to go to university and the people that choose to go to university and people who start businesses early or start working early. But then take off the kind of that branch, the ones that go to university, you then can stay on a pretty similar path. And then, you graduate at 21, 22, 23. From 21, 22 up to 25, again, you're on the same thing. You're finding your feet, you're getting your first job, you're being you're being at the bottom of the pile in work, and you're just like going on the same kind of treadmill as others are going on. I think this really common thing now is this idea of a quarter life crisis, which at 25, I think a lot of people in our generation have this sort of crisis of purpose and stuff. And it's like very common thing to talk about. And I think that was the point where I was suddenly like, what life do I actually want right now? Because this work life isn't necessarily suiting me. This social life, as much as I have so much love, all the friends in it, it wasn't quite right for me at that point in my life in terms of for that period. And so I had to try and figure out how do I make a shift away from it. And I mean, to be honest, it happened for me rather than, I took the opportunity during COVID, but it kind of presented itself to me. And that's where like 25 is where everything started. So 25, 26 is where things started to kind of move into a new direction.
I think it's really interesting because I feel like what's always been really amazing about you is that if I compare to like myself, I think you've trusted the direction. Like, I think I've done a lot of like forcing, trying to speed things up, get things to certain conclusions. I think you've trusted timing more. And if we actually reflect, and you obviously talk about this concept of collecting dots, right? Which I remember was like a really long time ago where you started to think about that concept of like collecting the dots. And if we now look back and look at connecting the dots, which you had collected, there were so many times where shifts happened like outside of your control to make sure you were on the right path. So like when it was in COVID and you got offered to leave Accenture, and then it was like, and you kind of were thinking about that as an option, and then it was like, here's loads of money to leave Accenture. It was like the weirdest thing. Like I had to, I quit, moved to Bali with, no money. You were like, here's like loads of money to leave Accenture. So yeah, that's an example of, and there've been other times in your life where things have happened externally, which have shifted you into deepening your journey. And I think sometimes that's been outside of your control. And that's like such an amazing example of sometimes trusting, like focusing on being the best version of yourself and trusting that things will unlock.
Yeah.
Definitely. As they're meant to unlock. And you talk about purpose. because I think purpose is this word that is so talked about in society. I think also a lot around men, modern masculinity around men, trying to understand our purpose. And I think we can get lost in that, can't we? Like searching for our purpose. Like, where are you at now with the concept of purpose?
Oh God, yeah. Well, I think I've been through like different parts of this. So I think 25, 26, well, I started thinking purpose was the most important thing in my early 20s. And I was like obsessively reading all sorts of books. I remember making my friend Lauren laugh about it when I was sort of had all these books on my bookshelf and I looked like a maniac just with all these books trying to figure out my purpose. And then I think I kind of had this like loss of faith in it. And I was like, well, this is just nonsense. This is just like a stupid thing to be spending your time doing. And at one point I read a kind of a spiritual book, but it was a book called Siddhartha, and it was about this man's journey in life. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me was the idea of being a father and parenthood and what matters in that. And I went from thinking like purpose is this thing which is very like individual and something that you find, and then and everyone has an individual one and it's all unique and everyone can find that one if they want to. And then I swang like the entire other way where there was only two options of purpose. And it's not necessarily true, but it was, I needed to be a father and that's it, because that is the ultimate purpose. And I kind of went very
What's
the
other option? You said the two
or a mother, right?
Oh, I see.
So like, and that was it. Like, it was like humans are just animals. We're just these things. And we just basically need to procreate and sustain humanity. And it was like this real like reductionist way of viewing things. I think now I found this space much more between those two where I know every choice I make right now is for me, but it's also for me as a father and me as a husband and me as a man in the next like 5 years. So that is kind of holding that to me, to like, that's a value that's holding me very close to like, okay, these choices I'm making now going to help me be the best like person that can support a family and that can provide and stuff and can give me the flexibility to be around for my children and be around for my wife and stuff. But at the same time, knowing that to do that, I need to be happy and content in my work. So I can't just be in a job that I hate or earning money, because then I'm also not going to be around for my family, like spiritually and emotionally. So then there's like that balance where now I know I need to find something which is meaningful, which I care about, which I have passion in, use that to kind of create a life I enjoy and generate money, whilst at the same time knowing that it's for this other reason, which is maybe to me a little bit higher importance as well.
You say that's actually going to like take me in a different direction slightly. And then we'll go back to what I was going to say. And I do totally agree with that. Like, I think it's really important. I think we're from such a strong family. We have such strong family values. And we've just been brought up. We've been very lucky with the family that we've been brought up with. And I do totally agree with that. But I do feel like from such a young age, and this is going to kind of lead us into your work, you have felt this such strong purpose. And obviously you're living that in the work that you're doing now around this new, well, it's not so much new technology now, but this new area of blockchain. And I am always, so because you understand the world in such a macro way that I don't understand. Like, you and Dad really have this like macro, and TJ and Mum probably I'm last, like my macro understanding of the world. Like, I'm very focused on understanding, I think, the individual. Like, that's what really like fascinates me in the individual like life and how we can be the best version of ourselves. You understand the macro world, the finance world in such a different way. And the way that you explain blockchain and looking at all of these things is the only time I've ever found it interesting. When other people talk about it, I don't find it interesting, I don't understand it. So linking it in with purpose, the way that you've talked about the impact of what blockchain can have, and I really believe your purpose is tied up in that, of how we can change the world with blockchain. You've talked about decentralization, you've talked about interdependence. This is kind of like a broad question, but I would love to lead that into, because I do believe, I really think, I was talking to Jay about purpose, and we talked about, like these 3 levels of purpose, and it being about family, and it being about doing work that we love, and it being about our own personal development. And I think having that impact in the world is a big part of our purpose and what I think we're here for. So I'd love to like carry on from that purpose conversation, thinking about the impact that you want to have on the world and the impact that you see blockchain being able to have? Because when you talk about it and the way that you share about blockchain, I think it's like so incredibly exciting and inspiring of what could happen with blockchain and how it can be an actual savior against this world of AI as well. So if you can weave that in.
Yeah.
I know that's broad.
Yeah. So I guess like my background is not a technologist and it's not an engineer and it's not that kind of mindset, but my background is more international relations, philosophy, politics. And that's where I kind of discovered this whole idea. But I think I kind of touched on this when I said about interdependence earlier. But I think as countries, as nations, as a society for like hundreds of years, thousands of years, we flex between these different kind of positions between being dependent, being independent, and being interdependent. And I think we flex between these as individuals, as companies, as businesses, as countries, as nations, and so forth. And what I think is happening more and more in society, and it kind of goes up and down, is we have a lot of dependence on the systems that we have around us. And if you look at kind of where Bitcoin first emerged, it was after the 2008 financial crash, right? That's when the white paper was published by Satoshi Nakamoto, who was likely a group of people who were basically saw a new way of managing the financial system. But ultimately, the financial crash happened in a very simple term, and my finance friends would probably say this was a bit reductionist, but it happened because a lot of people in society, basically from the 70s onwards to the end of the 20th century, borrowed and basically lived lives that they couldn't really afford. And essentially, they were just dependent on banks and dependent on where the money was coming from because they weren't independent. They weren't able to generate income and generate enough money to sustain and to create the lives that they wanted, right? And they had the opportunity to get a mortgage, to get a second mortgage, to get a third mortgage, and so forth. And it was just a continuation of dependency on this bigger system. Bitcoin's white paper, which kind of like was the first time that blockchain was really laid out as a technology, like for the masses, although it did kind of get discussed a lot in the 90s, was the first time that people said, actually, we can have a more independent way of viewing the financial system, and we can be more independent as individuals and businesses in the kind of the overarching way the world can work. And by being independent, by gaining our independence and sovereignty from the bigger systems, we can in turn get to the ultimate goal, which is interdependence. So interdependence is reciprocity. It's two independent people working together as one. It's in a relationship. It's an independent individual man with an independent individual woman, or whatever, or man, or it's two people working in harmony, but also both being independent. What we have so much of now is dependent businesses on other dependent businesses, or dependent individuals on other dependent individuals. And so there's this like codependence, which ultimately just won't work. Likewise, in society, we've also, in the last like 20 years, and I think it's happened a lot more, it happens a lot, is we focus on being independent in every way we can. It's like the highest value. It's like, we all need to be independent. We all need to have our own like thoughts. We all need to have our own way of looking at the world. And that is good up to a point. But at some point, you end up being self-obsessed, overly introspective, caring more about your own business and yourself, only caring about your profit and your revenue. And at some point, you just end up wasting away because you care too much about your own success and stuff. Interdependence is where we all care about each other's success and we all work together and it's win-win. I think that's ultimately like one of the key values I think that blockchain can be. It's multiple organizations kind of into things coming together and working more in harmony. So individual, independent blockchains, sovereign individuals supporting each other in different ways.
And how does, because I love the philosophy of that. And I think you and I really, different words, different methods, but we have such a similar vision, because when I think about Amplify is about empowering individuals, rise of the solo CEO, the solopreneur, empowering individuals to work and interact together. Our visions have been quite similar. And also that balance of interdependence being a balance of kind of the yin and yang, the yang being the massive independence and the yin being the dependence. Where does blockchain come into that? If for someone who doesn't understand blockchain, what is the relevance of the technology that's going to enable us to live in that interdependent system in this vision of the world?
Yeah. So I mean, blockchain. Or shall I explain blockchain in a way?
Explain the concept of blockchain to as much information as we need to understand how it can help us to create this nicer interdependent world.
The way that a lot of systems and ways of working currently work is that you have an organization or a business that manages all the data and all the information about you as an individual. Or you as a business, or whatever that might be. And so where they kind of like this is all based on, it's this idea of a ledger. It's the technology kind of called distributed ledger technology, right? So when information was first shared between humans, if you imagine you had a cave painting. So you had a cave, and the first recorded information we have of like information being shared and recorded is on the wall in the cave. And that might be just like art or something like that. But at some point, as we kind of matured and evolved as humans, we started to use like ink and different ways of like using information to record transactions essentially, but quite simple things, like you have this sheep and I have this product, this crop, and I have this many and you have this many, and we're going to swap, right? And so that is like a transaction. In order to make sure we all trust that and we remember that, someone, maybe started painting it on a cave painting wall, right? And it kind of like recorded that. Over time, we needed this kind of evolved. And so we started recording this into like script, into books. And so we'd have a physical book, which would record all the transactions. So me to you, you to me to this person, all the transactions in a physical book. And that book became the centralized database, essentially. It's a central database where anyone that wants to see what happens needs to go to that book. And so there's a gatekeeper to that book. Whoever holds that book holds the information. So whoever in society or in the political system holds the access and the control of that book has basically more power. But why should one person necessarily have more power than the other? That comes into like various different, like more political questions, right? And so that book, so cave painting, that book, then it evolved and we kind of started digitizing this information. And so we had all these records on, think of it as like an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet, right? You have these transactions. So imagine you now have a couple of cells, keeping it really simple. And in this document, you have all these people that can see these transactions. Now, the people who have the power are the ones that manage those transactions and have access to that transactions and have access to what goes into there and how much information of that spreadsheet other people are allowed access to. So once again, it's a centralized system of control. And so whoever controls all that information basically is going to be the one that kind of is able to make decisions about society, about the direction of society, about the way that the way that like money should be accessed and should be allocated and stuff in society. The distributed ledger technology or blockchain basically takes that idea of having a ledger, cave painting, book, spreadsheet, and opens it up for the world to have more access to and more access to see what happens. So rather than, someone going to that spreadsheet and entering a transaction and putting it in there, someone basically makes a transaction and then that's recorded on a public record on the blockchain. And that information is available for people to see and to analyze and to record and audit, and then have checks and balances against it. So it all comes down to transparency of information. The reason decentralization comes into it is because to avoid, like one central power having all the control, you need to have a way of decentralizing the way that the information is added to this spreadsheet. So the way that blockchain works is, say, for example, on some of the blockchains, every 6 seconds, a new block is created. And that basically means every 6 seconds, this list of transactions has more transactions added to it. This ledger has more transactions added to it. What happens is then a message gets sent out to the validators, these computers on a network. And they say, does the new transaction, so there's a new transaction that's added to it, is that all the previous transactions all the same? And it's like it's in code, it's a check. If they are, then we'll accept it and we'll allow this new transaction to be added. And so it's like all these different kind of validators or nodes or miners, whatever they might be called, are helping keep this accountable. If one person or multiple people say that some transaction has been changed, then it will be invalidated. And so it's a way of kind of keeping it transparent, making sure the management of it is decentralized, and then going to one step deeper, the governance of these blockchains can be done by everyone involved and anyone.
So it's more democratic.
Yeah, it's more democratic.
Yeah. Because I think people are listening to this and they might be thinking like, and I think, it doesn't really massively, like, I feel like it doesn't affect me because I don't fully understand data and how data is being used. But what I did understand so I understand that what you're saying is it's removing power from a small amount of people and sharing that democratically across everybody. And that's why it's an movement towards interdependence. But you also explained something to me, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it's not like the point of the episode, but as AI comes in, and obviously we're very excited by AI, every call I have these days, somebody is something plus AI, like everyone's now an expert in AI, because it's such a huge thing. But you explained to me that obviously there is a risk of AI, like we're excited by it and we're all loving using ChatGPT for our content and all these things, but actually there's massive threat that comes with it. But the way you explained to me is that blockchain is one of the key ways that we can prevent AI from being damaging. Can you explain that? Because I feel like that's really interesting and I can't remember exactly how it works.
Yeah. So, with AI, you have two key things. You have inference, which is basically prediction. So when you go to ChatGPT and you type something in, it's just basically a prediction machine. So it's looking at everything that's ever been said and written and done before that it has access to. And it's basically predicting the next word. And that's what creates the image or whatever. So you say, create an image of a podcast studio with two people sat on a sofa. It will go look at anything that's relevant to that of all history, and it will create that image based on what it knows, and it will predict what you're expecting based on that. That's inference. The other side is you have training. And so training AI to be able to do this inference is basically using the data. So where does it get the data from to train the models so that they know how to predict things? So training and inference. And this is what like LLMs do. Like this is how they work. The problem with this is, and there's this movement towards decentralized AI, is that, again, going back to kind of the same examples, if you have centralized systems that are deciding how these models should be trained and how they should be, and what kind of prediction, what kind of information they get trained on, and then the information that is used to then predict things, there may well end up at a point where whoever the body is that's got the most information going in and it's deciding the most information going in, they're going to have an impact on the direction of what gets predicted and what gets told. And so if you can find ways to use, blockchain, crypto, different incentive mechanisms to try and shift the power towards a more decentralized way, and more like democratic way, then it's a little bit fairer. And if we start to make a lot of our decisions in society based on what AI is saying, we need to be sure that the information that's being fed in is something that we all can kind of trust and agree on.
Okay. And linking that now, like that's obviously like the interdependence, the decentralization is very much like your philosophy that, you believe in the power of blockchain and the importance of that transparency and that trust. Your first entrance into blockchain was when you did your dissertation, which I think is so rare that someone actually does their dissertation on something which...
Back then it was probably quite common now.
No, not that it's on blockchain, but as in that you did it on something that you actually were interested in long term. Like I think you and TJ both got that right with your studies. I did not get that right. I think a lot of people did not get that right with what they studied at uni, even though it's supposed to be a vocational thing. You obviously now you do a lot of work with, obviously Checked works in ID, self-sovereignty. You also do a lot of work with refugees, and you've obviously always had this passion for what blockchain can do for more of the developing world and the impact that can have. Because I think when we think about the way our world is, the out of balance that we have in our world, it's just so insane. These gaps, it just makes no sense. If the aliens were looking down on our planet, it would make no sense how we can have this huge gap between rich and poor and this situation that we have over in a lot of the developing world. And how does all of that link in to the blockchain space? And that's, I feel like, is a lot around your purpose of
Yeah, trying to come to that. So yeah, I mean, 2014, spent 3 months working in Zimbabwe through DFID, Department of International Development, on a project there, and then joined university, made all my studies focused on politics of sub-Saharan Africa, and I kind of made that like my key topic and looked at the problems of aid and development and learned many different reasons for why the time I'd spent in Zimbabwe as a 19-year-old, British guy with zero context on what to do was probably not the best type of aid that we should be using, and not the most empowering type of thing to be doing. And then towards the end of uni, I kind of started realizing that this actually comes down to dependence again, but there's a lot of the way that we approach kind of trying to improve countries which are less like economically developed or less well off than our countries, is we create a model which kind of on the surface can look like we're being very supportive and giving aid and giving money and stuff. But in a lot of ways, it creates dependence again. It creates a dependence of this country to another country. We are dependent on you, and we will always be dependent on you. And as much as like we, colonialism sort of became, unpopular, and we had this rapid end to colonialism in the 50s and 60s and even before, the dependence never really shifted. We still created, it still ended up in a similar kind of dynamic. And so I started looking at how do you actually get money directly to the people that can actually use the money. And I read this amazing book called Poor Economics, which was basically to say that in a lot of the emerging like countries in the emerging markets, they are the individuals that are kind of living on the smallest amount of money per day compared to everywhere else, $1 a day, $2 a day, what was kind of known as like absolute poverty for that time while I was studying. I don't know what the figures are now. Those are actually the people who are the best entrepreneurs in the world, because entrepreneurs are people who can basically turn a small amount of money into something else. And someone that can support a family of many, many people on a small amount of money is more entrepreneurial than loads of entrepreneurs elsewhere.
That's so interesting based on that conversation we had before about VCs and founders.
So so I was like, how do you get more, what's going on in the world of like aid and development to get money to people who actually can do something with it? And I stumbled across microfinance, and I read a lot about microfinance in India and some of the kind of ideas there. And I got quite excited by it. And I thought, well, okay, this is how it's done. And there's something called the Grameen Grameen Foundation, which turned into a bank. And then there's something called SKS Finance. And I read all about microfinance, and I kind of was like, my eyes kind of lit up, and I was like, this is amazing. This is how it works. The problem with that is, once more, it's all about dependency and dependence. And you end up with these banks that provide loans, but then they have these interest rates, which make it so hard to ever pay the money back that in India, for example, when this first started happening, you had this insane spike of suicides amongst male farmers. And it's actually crazy to see the statistics on it, because people were taking out these loans to try and basically improve their opportunity and things. They were then unable to pay back the loans because they didn't fully understand. They didn't have necessarily the financial literacy to say, this is how much money I'm going to have to pay back. So it ended up being a broken system, and it's improved in things. And there's probably people who disagree with things I've said there. But so then at the same time, blockchain was kind of emerging, and blockchain offers an opportunity to get individuals to have more opportunity to kind of manage their own finances and get cash directly to people and not go through third parties and through intermediaries. And so my dissertation became on how do you use blockchain as a tool to build trust at different institutional levels, at the level between individuals, at the level between individual and their government, and citizen to government level. And then how do you improve trust between governments and governments? And over time, if you can improve trust starting from the ground up, going up to the top, and then improve trust from the top down, once you improve trust, you can improve entrepreneurship and through business outcomes and things like that.
So cool. And it's interesting that it's like around trust. And we started a podcast talking about how flow is about authenticity and honesty and trust. Like, there's so many interesting links with you and your work and your passions. I just love how it all flows together. Thank you for explaining that. I think it's so interesting.
What's amazing on the idea of, I think we talked a bit, before around, clarity and becoming your own role model and becoming things like this. Like, I did that dissertation in 2016, 2017. This month, with the company I'm at, Checked, we'll be announcing it in the first week of July. But we've partnered with a company called Refunite, which is the largest family reunification agency in the world. Started in 2006, I think, by two Danish American people who had basically seen what happens when a child is separated from their family after escaping and fleeing, whatever situation they're in. This child was from Afghanistan, and they ended up realizing it didn't really exist, and there was a problem to try and help reunify people. Now they have 130 million people on their network and they've basically helped reunite in the millions of families. Oh. And we're now exploring how to use digital identity or decentralized identity to help provide all of these individuals an identity which isn't controlled by whatever government they're in or whatever country they're in. It's completely under their control, a self-sovereign identity that only they have the full kind of autonomy to like control and own. And they can decide what data gets shared, and they can decide what people can know about them, which is really important as a refugee, someone's kind of moving between borders, because you don't necessarily want to give everything away. Mm-hmm. So you need to have the control, you need to have the freedom, the sovereignty. And so it's a real full circle of my dissertation ultimately leading to the project I'm working on now. And long term, the project is also exploring how do you use this kind of network and these individuals having a kind of a neat identity to relay funds directly to the individuals who can do good with the money, with a kind of the democratic governance system. So yeah, it's a good full circle.
It's so amazing. It's so cool how I think you have always, because we used to make jokes when we were younger, because you were like not the tech one of the family.
No.
Like when it would, but more consumer tech focused, like I was like a bit of a nerd with technology, and you were like not so much in tech.
TJ was in his room playing COD, and I don't know what I was doing all the time when TJ was playing COD and making YouTube videos about his clan, and you were doing whatever you did in your bedroom. I must have just been sat. I don't know what I was doing.
You're probably with your friends. Me and TJ are like a bit more maybe isolated. No, actually when I was young, I was quite social. Okay, so stepping out of like that and that being because I think, we led into this thinking about what purpose is, and purpose being doing work that has an impact, building a family, and being the best version of yourself. These like three key points of purpose, I think. So if we go back to being the best version of you mentioned the Matthew McConaughey speech and that concept of like being your own role model. I think it's really important that we all find behaviors and habits and things that enable us to be the best version of ourselves. I don't think there's a blanket way. I don't think everyone needs to meditate. I don't think everyone needs to whatever. It's like finding what works for you. Mm-hmm. And I feel like you've really found that. You've just celebrated your 6 months booze-free.
Yep.
All the powers, booze-free. And that's obviously a big thing, which we can cover. But also, you told me a little bit about your breathwork experience, but even over in Bali, you've got your exercise. Like, what do you do to be the best version of yourself? How do you maintain that? What do you do for that? What does that mean to you?
I guess kind of finding ways you can stay as consistent as possible with who you are is quite helpful. And I think for me personally, alcohol made it quite hard for me to stay consistent in my work, in my exercise, in my mental health, in my friendships, in relationships. It was hard to stay as a consistent person, hard to stay consistently, authentically Ross Power, because it had such a quick way of changing how I perceived myself and perceived the world around me. So I think alcohol is definitely one thing which has helped me, just like stay confident and true to myself, and not feel like I was having to kind of come back every weekend or come back every week from, losing myself a little bit, whether I was only drinking one or two. It just didn't work for me that well. I think then also just finding ways of consistently keeping exercise up at a point where you're constantly, I guess, striving towards something or making some sort of progress. I think in the last couple of years, I've always had something I'm working towards, whether it's a marathon, a half Ironman, some sort of challenge that I want to try and achieve, or now it's CrossFit and it's exercise and it's surfing bigger waves and it's getting barreled at some point. I've always had something to strive towards, and I think that's what we should always be.
Getting barreled is a good thing.
Well, yeah, it means you're going through. I mean,
Doesn't sound like a good thing, does
yeah,
it? Like
when you go through the wave, right? I can't do it.
no, I know, but if getting barreled would sound like that was not a good thing.
No,
but it is a good thing. For those of you who don't know surfing, it's a good thing. You want to be barreled.
So yeah, I think having a consistent exercise routine and making sure you're at least like working towards something, I think is helpful. I think the best thing to do if you're wanting to get fit is sign up for something, in my view, or sign up to some goal, or generally the best thing to do. I mean, so I've decided in 2 weeks' time I'm buying a guitar because I was reading a book called I was reading a really good book, and one of the exercises it had in it talks about deathbed regrets. It was like, write down what things that you would regret if you had 5 minutes to live right now. What were the biggest regrets you had? And the first thing that came up was not being able to play guitar and sing. First thing I wrote. Second one was not being able to speak a second language. And this goes back to the whole idea of striving towards something. If I just buy a guitar and have no deadline, then I'm not going to know, like, I'm not going to have something to work towards. So I've told you this, I'm going to buy a guitar and then I'm going to sign up for an open mic night.
Oh my goodness. Out here or at home?
Out here.
Oh, out here, okay.
I expect so. And then I will have something to work towards. Even if it goes terribly and I sound awful and I make myself cringe, at least I'll have had that to work towards.
Yeah.
So I guess like flow to me is striving as well. Like it's having something that you're working towards and you're feeling like, if I get to this point, I'll be proud of that I've done it, and I'll be happy that I've done it. It doesn't mean you have to do it forever, but focusing on something.
Yeah. And like if you bought the guitar and didn't have a deadline, dreamer mode.
Yeah.
But if you became so obsessed with the guitar and being the best and defining your self-worth by it and doing it all the time, achieve mode.
Totally.
So we're going to do it in perform mode.
Definitely.
And breath work. That's the thing that you're into.
Yeah, I think
that's a new thing for you.
Very new thing. I came out to Bali and have basically been as cliche as I can be, proudly, which I kind of put in an Instagram post. And yeah, I came out here. Someone said, well, my friend Sophie said, you should try this breath work out. And I kind of was like, yeah, okay, cool. I've done Headspace. I've used every breath work app. I've got obsessed with streaks. And if I miss a day of meditating, I fucking hate the app and want to burn it. Delete because I missed one day. So I didn't really get it fully what it would all be about. And so I went to this breathwork class and it was just, it was 2 hours and it was pretty wild what it did for my mind. And having not really been drinking or doing anything for the last 6 months, I think it was an interesting experience to experience. I guess the only thing I can compare it would be like some sort of like drug, basically. When you take a drug and it kind of opens your mind up a bit, it was like that. And so it kind of put me to some places I didn't know that you could do without taking a drug. And
you had a big release.
Yeah, I had a big release. I cried for an hour about some things that I hadn't realized I'd like locked up. Some of the traumas that had happened in our family that I'd seen as someone else's pain, someone else's grief, someone else's sadness, and always been there as someone to support them through it, but never really seeing myself as deserving of being in pain for it. Whether it was the death of a cousin or a loved one or something like that. It was not my pain to experience because there was someone else who was closer to the pain. And so I can be there to be as someone to support them and give them comfort. But it's not for me to have experienced the pain because it's not that I don't deserve the pain, but someone else has it worse. And same with your experience, you had it worse. And so it was more about me being someone who can support you rather than me being supportive of myself. And I think now, like I realized during that experience that is something that has been buried in me. And I think that's what these things can do. They can bring up things and then make you realize things that you didn't know about. And it gives you a lot of freedom.
Totally, because I think, I'm obviously like a big advocate of therapy, but I don't think therapy is the only way that we can heal and process things. And I think from listening to your experience, it was a very like therapeutic process releasing thing. Like you definitely feel like evolved having done these experiences. I just think it's a really cool, I've not really heard of breathwork having, being utilized in that way. I've seen it as like, yes, it's something that can help with, because I think a lot of these like behaviors, we link them to if you're having mental health problems, rather than seeing as things that can help you to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you only need to meditate if you've got anxiety, or breath work is, but actually if you utilize these things and you go all into them in like a session, you don't have to necessarily do it every single day and stress yourself out, but like have that time.
Yeah, I went to it not with anything on my mind, really. I didn't have anything that I was like, I need to work through this. I just moved out here, happy with my job, feeling okay about a previous relationship that had come to an end. I was just generally in a good headspace. I was excited and surfing. And I thought I wasn't going because I didn't realize I needed something to fix something. I just wanted to go to just enjoy the experience, just like I tried CrossFit out and then I went surfing and then I tried a yoga class. It was just one of these different experiences I can have. And I think, I guess it's like, it's a way of doing something which you can access as part of yourself. And then I think in combination with like writing about it and journaling, I think that's a big thing that's changed in the last month. Just like I met someone who was just like incredibly inspiring, the way she approached documenting her thoughts, and her book was more like her therapist than a book. It was chaotic and wild and just amazing how she just approached just like sharing her thoughts into this book. And I think doing some breath work 3 times now and then opening a book and then writing about it, it just makes you it's just so freeing and just makes you feel, and maybe it's a bit cringe for people to hear that if they've never experienced something, but it just makes you so much lighter.
That feeds quite nicely into, we've got like 10 minutes left of the room. We've talked, I think, particularly over the last like 9 months, you, TJ and I, a lot about like masculinity, femininity. I think it's like such an interesting conversation. I've had loads of conversations on the podcast and with other people about, what is modern masculinity, and how can, you talked about like crying then, how can we find this balance in our modern society? We're so out of balance, a lot of men in their feminine, women in their masculine. We've seen the rise of, people leading in masculine spaces and maybe that not being completely the right way to go about it. And I think you've really found your like masculine power, but in this really healthy way where you're able to like step into both. And I'd love to like, as we're drawing to the end of the conversation, think about what does it mean to you now? And what is it for you to be a modern, like masculine man?
Yeah, I think when I read a book again at 26, Time of Change, which was called The Way of the Superior Man. And it sounds like a book which people would be against, because the idea of a superior man, it sounds to be like superior to a woman, right? It's not about that. It's how to be a man that's, how to be a man that's kind of like high quality man, right? And this book was the first time I realized some aspects of myself which I thought were bad were actually good. And, I'm a highly sensitive person. I was a sensitive child. I am like quite an empathetic person, and I feel like other people's pain quite a lot. And all those traits, I'd spent a lot of time thinking that made me like feminine. That made me like more like a woman. Like it made me more like feminine in the way I would approach things, or having empathy, or loving my male friends. But the idea of being a masculine man is being someone who can balance empathy and compassion and kindness with being someone who's decisive, who has clarity, who has a vision, who says who does what they say they're gonna do, and then who does have it in them to support the people around them. And so I think, in the last couple of years, I think I lost sight of that at times. But I kind of know it was always there. And I think in society now, we are so confused around what it means to be a man or be a woman, because women are being encouraged to be, in some ways, maybe less emotional and being more logical and more have more reason and being more structured and use more of the masculine energies because it feels necessary. Whilst men are being encouraged, maybe, we're hearing like men should be more emotional, men should be more in touch with themselves and stuff like that, which is positive. but it has to be balanced, right, to a point. And so, yes, we need men to be in touch with who they are and be emotional and stuff, but men should also have a level of clarity, decisiveness, vision, discipline, all the things that are important, and all the things that kind of create a good balance in a person. And so, realizing that actually being sensitive while being decisive, being caring while being, not aggressive, but being assertive. Those things are all like a balance where you can find a place in between both of them. And one of the biggest unlocks for me was actively deciding to be a decisive person, because growing up, like even a supermarket shop was hard for me, and I'd walk in and TJ would be choosing something, and whatever he would choose, I'd I'll have whatever yogurt he has, or have, because I was always indecisive about what I wanted. And indecisive people are sometimes it's a trait that happens when people are kind of thinking too much about other people. But actually being indecisive isn't caring at all. It's not a thoughtful thing to do. It's not a kind thing to do in any way. And I think indecisiveness is not a masculine trait. And I realized like the most thoughtful thing you can do is actually be decisive, but the decisiveness should be thoughtful. You should be thoughtful about it. So, I had a really nice weekend recently. I was decisive during the weekend. I was able to make good decisions and had a plan and went with that. And it meant it was much more enjoyable for the people involved. But I was only able to be decisive because I'd spent weeks thinking about it and planning it and being thoughtful about what would work and what wouldn't work, and what would be a good thing to do and what wouldn't, and what would suit that person and what wouldn't. And so in doing that and having that decisiveness, I was able to be maybe more masculine, but had the flexibility as well during it. So it's that balancing act.
Always good to end the conversation on balance, because we know that is the spice of life, the spice of flow. So wrapping up here, what would be the message that you would want to leave listeners with, and what would be an action that they could take? I like that deathbed one, the 5-minute deathbed thing, so you can use that again if you want.
That could be one, yeah. I think the message for me would be, and it's what I've heard this message probably hundreds of times on podcasts, and I've read it in books, and I've listened to it, and I've heard it countless times, and it's never stuck to me what it actually means. And if anything, it's just made me cringe. But now I actually maybe understand it more. I realize like what the people were saying all along, and maybe whenever it lands with you, you're just ready for it to land with you. But this idea of just being of telling the truth and being authentic is actually the biggest thing that I would say to take away, because whether you're like, single as a man or a woman and you're looking to attract another partner, or you're in a company and you're wanting to get to the next level, or you're in a relationship and you're wanting to figure out what's going wrong with it, the best thing that can always be done is just tell the truth and be authentic, and then have the conversations that come out of it. And it makes life so much easier when you tell the truth in every opportunity you get, because it's just, I mean, in a purely pragmatic way, it's just more efficient. Yeah. So if you're a practical person and you're hearing this podcast and you're going, ugh, so much spiritual stuff, it still works for you, because it just
I don't think telling the truth is like too much spiritual stuff.
No, not that. But like just telling the truth will just make your life more efficient, faster, easier. You'll get the outcomes you want much quicker. Truth will set you free. But then on the other side of it, it's like, if you believe in the other side of, and you're more open to that, then being authentic will just make life just so much more blissful and enjoyable. And the people around you will just see that. So I think that's the biggest message. Any opportunity you can, tell the truth. Obviously, at times in life, we have to be cautious when we reveal information, because sometimes you have to hold information back to the right time. But I think that's my takeaway message. And then the other thing, the activity that people can do, get a piece of paper, and it sounds a bit morbid, but if you were to die in 5 minutes, what would be the things that you would regret? And if they are not necessarily regrets about things you've done, because I don't believe in those as regrets, whatever you've done in the past, it made you who you are now. So just forget that. But what are the things that you maybe wish you could do or can do? What are the abilities you have? So for me, playing guitar, speaking another language, these kind of things. Because whatever those are, you've got plenty of time to go do them.
Well, that was wonderful. That was really interesting, Rossi. I have so many more questions, but we'll wrap up there. And I'm really excited to see what happens next. I feel like this has been a really powerful last few months for you as you've stepped into this version of yourself. And I just feel like you're just unlocking this magnetic, flowing version of yourself. We'll have to have a check-in a year on the podcast to see what came next, because I feel like this is the start of some real magic for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.